My name is Jeff Bama. I guess I'm a self-professed history dork. Anything I get my hands on, I try to read it, and for whatever reason, I can retain it. I always try to find what else. So when I moved to Fells Point, all I ever heard about was the War of 1812. War of 1812, War of 1812. Some captain stayed here, War of 1812. I started looking into a couple of the buildings and started to stumble upon a history that was pretty ridiculous. So let's face it, murder and mayhem always makes for fun stories. So I would start leaning more towards that and started to find a underbelly of Baltimore that is often not talked about.
And what is that underbelly?
The underbelly is essentially the origin of or continuation of the name Mobtown. And why is it called Mobtown? There's really no mob here. What's the story behind it? And through research, started to find that prior to the Civil War, Baltimore was a very bloodthirsty and just nasty, nasty place to be. Pretty much the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, you have Baltimore increases its population. It almost quadruples in size. That puts some social strains on. Baltimore was only second to New York and Ellis Island for immigration. That starts to put strains on resources.
Okay.
And some tension starts to build. And out of this tension, you start to get bands of young kids that are up to no good. Baltimore's starting to rip at the seams, politically speaking. The Plug Uglies are a nativist American club that forms in the mid-1850s over on the west side of Baltimore. They tend to ally themselves with the American Party, which is an anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant party. These young kids that are hanging out on street corners tend to congregate around fire clubs. So Baltimore did not have a fire department that was paid for by the city. They had the volunteer fire department. It was a pretty big to-do when there was a fire. Everything had to be poled by the men. So you have large groups of men pulling the fire apparatus to the fire as fast as they can. You have other men carrying hooks, ladders, carrying buckets, whatever is needed. It became a massive spectacle, and as a young kid, it would have been pretty awe-inspiring. They used to have bands that would follow them and play songs. They all dressed the same. It was something to break the monotony of your life, and it started to help bolster neighborhood pride. It also became a criminal enterprise. If you got to the fire first and put it out, you got neighborhood clout. People would buy you drinks everywhere you went, but you also got to rob the place.
So the people putting out the fire will get to rob the building that they just put the fire out of.
Yes. With good intentions, it starts to turn into a more sinister take on things. And around the 1830s, it starts to be two clubs racing as fast as they can to get to a fire.
Wow.
Now, when they get to the fire, they would fight, and it's starting to get more and more violent.
It almost sounds like it was like a war zone.
It starts to become a war zone. Once politics starts to become involved, now the stakes get raised even more.
And how did it go from firehouses to politics?
Well, politicians started to realize that these young, brave men who are willing to do anything, commit murder, fight, rob, steal, you can use them. Baltimore's elections were kind of flawed in and of itself. If you controlled the area in front of the polling house, you controlled the election. Politicians realized this, and they started to attach themselves to the larger fire companies, the tougher, the ones with the worst reputations. The way polling works is you have a window, and you have to make it to that window and hand them a ballot. So everybody knew who you were voting for.
That's what I was going to say. It's not private like it is today.
The problem with it is you have to get to the window. So if you control the window, the area in front, you control the election. So the Plug Uglies, the Double Pumps, some of the other street gangs would stand in front of the window with muskets, carpenter awls, knives, bats, pile of bricks. Here in Fells Point on Eastern Avenue, they brought a cannon. They would stab you as soon as you walked up. One of the famous practices here in Baltimore was the coup.
Let's see if I can explain cooping in 30 seconds or less. Ready? Go. Innocent bystanders would be picked up off the streets by gangs, thrown into basements, and force-fed alcohol and drugs for about 3 or 4 days. Then, the gangs would make these people leave the basement and go and vote again and again and again. And in between the votings, the gangs would make them switch clothes, cut their hair, and pretty much do anything to change their appearance. Many did not survive this ordeal. Did I make it?
Estimation, how many times would they run a person through this?
There's quite a few accounts. There's a guy who was kidnapped here in Fells Point, a German. He was voted 16 times. The belief is that Edgar Allan Poe was voted 33 times.
Wait. Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay. You gotta tell me this.